Hello, so what's your name?
My name's actually Simon Cowell.
And what Lauren said about your lovely son Eric was so touching.
I know, he's changed my life. I mean, I adore him.
On January 2020, microphones at the London Palladium picked up something they were never supposed to make public, but somehow it just happened. David Walliams, sitting at the Britain's Got Talent judge's desk, called an elderly contestant a specific expletive 3 times, then made a sexually crude remark about a female contestant. Private conversations, he would later say, among friends. 2 years later, The Guardian published the transcript. It was brutal. The fallout removed Walliams from the show he had helped build for a decade, generated a £5 million lawsuit, and forced Simon Cowell to finally say what he thought about all of it. Something he never believed in his wildest dreams could happen. What he said was careful. What he didn't say was louder. This is the full story. The moment that changed everything. The Walliams recording.
This week on itv.com/talent.
It's a long time since I stood on a stage like that.
Come on.
This kid was definitely born to sing.
Private conversations between friends. That was how David Walliams described what the microphones caught at the London Palladium in January 2020. It was a direct one. The transcript that The Guardian published 2 years later told a different story. Britain's Got Talent has been recording judges' desk conversations since 2018. I guess he never had a clue about it. That is not a detail that emerged in the scandal. It was announced publicly at the time as a production policy change. Conversations between judges during auditions would be captured and could potentially be used in broadcast content. Everybody, including the judges and the production team, knew. But what no one knew was the content of the recordings. The BGT auditions at the London Palladium on January 2020 proceeded the way they always did. Acts came and went. The judges reacted, the cameras rolled, and in the breaks between acts, in the moments when the pressure of performance was briefly lifted, conversations happened at the desk that were not supposed to get the public's attention. David Walliams had been a BGT judge since 2012, 8 years on the panel at that point. He was a beloved figure on the show, the comedian who brought lightness and warmth to the format, a best-selling children's author, one of Britain's most recognizable faces. A man whose public identity was built on being funny and kind and broadly accessible. What the transcript revealed was nowhere close to that identity. He called an elderly male contestant a specific expletive 3 times after the man had left the stage, not in a fit of frustration during a difficult judging moment, apparently with sufficient casualness that the word came 3 times in the same brief exchange. He made a sexually crude remark about a female contestant. The language was explicit and demeaning in a way that the specific person it was directed at would have found deeply humiliating if she had heard it. It was clear to anyone to understand. These were not ambiguous. They were not context-dependent. They were straightforwardly offensive remarks about real people who had come to the show in good faith and submitted themselves to the judgment of the panel. The Guardian published the transcript in December 2022. The reaction was nothing anyone saw coming. Walliams issued an apology that same day. The statement said that these were private conversations and, like most conversations with friends, were never intended to be shared. He said he was sorry. The framing of that apology was itself immediately contentious. Private conversations. The suggestion that what was said in private carried different standards than what was said publicly. That the comments were regrettable primarily because they became visible rather than because of what they actually contained. The public was still not comfortable with those words. Neither were there many commentators. The argument that followed about what public figures are permitted to say privately about the people who come to audition for their shows was one that Walliams' apology did not resolve. In January 2023, it was confirmed that it was the last time Walliams would return to BGT. His 10-year run on the show came to an end without ceremony. Series 16 of BGT premiered without him. Bruno Tonioli, best known from Strictly Come Dancing, was brought in as his replacement alongside the 3 remaining judges, Cowell, Amanda Holden, and Alicia Dixon. The show kept moving. The format absorbed the departure the way formats absorb the departure of individual judges. BGT had never really been about any specific judge. It had always been about the acts. Cowell had said as much publicly on multiple occasions. But the departure left a specific question hanging that the show's continued momentum could not entirely obscure. What did Simon Cowell know, and when did he actually know it? He had been in that building. He had been at that desk. He was the executive producer and the most powerful individual connected to the franchise. The conversations had been recorded under a production policy that existed because his show had put it in place. His initial public response was a deflection so complete it was almost its own kind of answer. Asked by the Daily Star for his thoughts on the Walliams situation, he said simply, "Can we not go there?" 3 words, a refusal to engage. From a man who had never previously struggled to have a public opinion about anything connected to his television empire. Cowell refusing to say anything at the time was loud, and when he finally did, there were pieces of the puzzle that needed to be pieced together. Simon Cowell finally speaks what he said and what he didn't.
When we really bonded.
David, you're married? No.
But if you were single, yes. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay.
Simon Cowell has responded strongly to the bizarre accusations made by former Britain's Got Talent judge David Walliams.
Simon Cowell has been the most powerful man in British talent television for over 2 decades. At least no one could demean his impact. He does not say things carelessly. He does not give interviews without knowing exactly what message he wants to leave the room with. Every public statement he makes is a calculation, not in a cynical way. In the way anyone who has trained himself will do without getting on the public radar, meaning any word he did say about the Walliams scandal was intentional, and anyone he chose to be mute about was part of the plan. The first time he spoke publicly about it at any length was in April 2023, 4 months after the transcript had been published. 4 months after the show had moved on, a replacement had been found, and the immediate media storm had slightly subsided. He revealed a lot to The Sun. He called the leaked comments upsetting. He said they were completely unacceptable. Those 2 words, upsetting and completely unacceptable, were the clearest moral statement he made across the entire period of the scandal's public life. Then he started doing something different. He started describing his own position in the decision-making process in a way that carefully placed him at a distance from the outcome. This was a calculated move. He didn't want the public judgment. From what I understand, he made a statement saying David made a choice to stay back. From what I understand. The language of someone receiving information rather than someone directing events. There was something behind it. He said it all happened relatively quickly. He said he had been on holiday when the situation developed. He said the next thing he knew, he was having conversations about who would take Walliams' place. He said he and Walliams had agreed to let the producers make the final decision because they were more hands-on. He was an executive producer. One of the most powerful people is connected to the production. And his position made him visible to all the happenings behind the scenes, especially while on holiday. That positioning deserves to be examined carefully, not to accuse him of dishonesty. But the gap between that account and what an executive producer's actual level of involvement in a crisis of this magnitude would typically look like is significant. When Walliams subsequently sued Fremantle for misuse of private information, Cowell's response shifted from careful distance to active contestation. He unfollowed Walliams on Instagram. An insider close to Cowell gave a quote to The Sun describing Walliams' allegations as absurd, embarrassing, and utterly bizarre. A high court writ was filed on Cowell's behalf stating that many of the allegations were just plain wrong. The specific allegation Walliams was making was that he had been surreptitiously recorded. The production had secretly captured his private conversations without his knowledge or consent. The response was unequivocal. It was announced in 2018 that judges' comments would be recorded. Since then, they have been used regularly in audition episodes. The idea that he was secretly recorded did not agree with the rules he knew all along. It was quite absurd. 2 entirely different accounts of the same situation. Walliams describes himself as the victim of a secret recording. Cowell's team described a publicly announced policy that Walliams had known about for 2 years before the comments in question were made. One of these accounts is more consistent with the documented record, but what neither account fully addressed was the central question that both of them strategically avoided: the people who were talked about, the elderly contestant, the female contestant. Were they ever formally informed of what had been said? Were they ever contacted? Were they ever given the specific compensation or acknowledgement that the situation arguably warranted? The settlement reached in November 2023 between Walliams and Fremantle, approximately £5 million, addressed his grievance about the recording, his claim for misuse of private information, his sense of being wronged, but never looked anything in the direction of the contestants. Cowell's statements were careful, morally positioned, and strategically distanced. They communicated what needed to be communicated to protect the show's ongoing credibility. They drew a line under the matter without fully reckoning with everything that line was being drawn around, and the show kept going. Series 16. Bruno Tonioli is in the chair. The format absorbs the scandal the way it had absorbed every previous crisis. But the Walliams scandal was not the only time Simon Cowell had been forced to protect the show he built. This was the first time BGT came under the spotlight. His pattern of responses reveals something deeper that many weren't seeing at the time. The show's history of controversy context for the biggest scandal.
David Walliams sues Britain's Got Talent bosses over X-rated rant. David Walliams is allegedly suing Britain's Got Talent bosses.
Britain's Got Talent has been running since 2007. 19 series, nearly 2 decades of live television, viral moments, and an audience that has always been fiercely invested in both the talent and the drama surrounding it. In that time, it has generated more scandals, fixed allegations, and institutional crises than almost any other show in British television history. And Simon Cowell has never failed to defend its interests all through. That pattern is worth understanding, because the Walliams scandal did not arrive in isolation. It arrived as the most serious entry in a long catalog of controversies that had been testing Cowell's management of the franchise since its earliest series. 2011. Ronan Park was 12 years old, a boy with an extraordinary voice who had become one of that series' most talked about acts. An anonymous blogger claiming to be a music industry insider posted an allegation that stopped the internet cold. Park already had a management deal, the blogger claimed. He had been identified and groomed for success by Cowell's label long before the show began. The results, by implication, were predetermined. BGT was fixed. They didn't change their stance. The allegation spread with the speed that internet allegations always travel when they confirm what a certain section of the audience already suspects. The furor was significant enough that Cowell took the extraordinary step of calling in the police to investigate. He was not going to absorb this quietly. He was going to pursue the source. The investigation did not produce a prosecution. The allegations were never formally substantiated. But the damage to the show's credibility in that period was real, and it established a template for how false allegations would follow BGT across its subsequent series. 2014 brought a different kind of scandal. Jules O'Dwyer and her border collie Matisse won the series. The act that had charmed the country, a woman and her dog performing a tightrope walk, was subsequently revealed to have used a different, more trained dog for the tightrope element of the performance during the live final. Matisse had apparently not been capable of performing according to the standards needed. Many people complained about it to Ofcom and ITV, at least 1,000 of them. Ofcom investigated. The ruling was that viewers had been misled. Somehow one could tell it was planned. Simon Cowell's response was direct. The duo would not be stripped of their £250,000 prize money. The show would take the ruling, acknowledge it, and move forward. He did not attempt to argue that the audience had not been misled. He accepted the finding and absorbed it into the show's ongoing narrative. That is a specific kind of crisis management, not denial, absorption. The controversy becomes part of the show's history rather than an existential threat to its future. 2022 brought the Lauren Allred situation. She was an American-born professional singer whose identity as a professional was not immediately apparent to the BGT audience. Amanda Holden's golden buzzer sent her straight to the final. When her professional background became public knowledge, the backlash was substantial. Cowell addressed it directly to The Sun. He said that year there were fewer professionals on the show. He said that was where they had started, opening the show to anyone regardless of their day job or hidden talent. He framed the Allred situation as an exception within a format that remained fundamentally committed to ordinary people with extraordinary abilities. Whether that framing was accurate or not, it worked as a public narrative. The controversy faded. The show continued. And then, in 2025, fans watching a magician act spotted what appeared to be a glaring error. A moment that suggested Cowell had prior knowledge of how the trick would unfold before it did. The staged act accusations spread rapidly across social media. Headlines appeared describing Cowell as embroiled in a BGT staged row. The pattern across all of these situations is consistent. An allegation surfaces. It generates significant public noise. Cowell responds with a combination of selective acknowledgement and strategic repositioning. The show absorbs the controversy. The next series begins. He has never significantly wavered from his central position on BGT's identity. The talent is the show, not the judges. Not the controversies, not the scandals, the talent. If you don't have great talent, you don't have a show. He said that at the Variety Club Show Business Awards. He has said versions of it across multiple interviews over multiple years. It is the anchor he returns to whenever the institution he built needs defending. And yet the biggest scandal in the show's history was not about the talent, it was about the people who were on the judgment seat. And that distinction was what made everything complicated. David Walliams fights back, the feud that kept going. David Walliams did not leave quietly. He apologized. He stepped down. He let the headlines run their course through December 2022 and January 2023. He watched Bruno Tonioli take his chair on the BGT panel for Series 16. He kept his public comments minimal while the immediate storm was at its loudest. And then he sued. The lawsuit against Fremantle, the production company behind Britain's Got Talent, was filed for misuse of private information. His argument was straightforward in its framing. The conversations recorded at the London Palladium in January 2020 were private. Whatever production policy existed around recording judges' desk conversations, those specific exchanges had not been shared with his consent, and their publication had caused him irreparable damage. The legal process took the whole of 2023. It was swift. It wasn't quiet. He spoiled so many things, including a genuine friendship. On November 2023, the matter was ultimately settled. Fremantle paid Walliams approximately £5 million. Alongside the financial settlement, the production company issued a formal apology. The statement said they were sincerely sorry that his private conversations as a judge on Britain's Got Talent were published, and that this caused him great distress. They said they had reviewed their production practices on the show to ensure they fully respected the expectations of their talent while satisfying the requirements of the show. They said their relationship with David was never regretted. Read that statement carefully. Fremantle apologized for the publication of his private conversations, not for the conversations themselves. The apology ran entirely in the direction of Walliams as the wronged party. The publication of what he said was the problem, not what he said. For the contestants who were described in those conversations, the settlement addressed nothing. Simon Cowell's response to the lawsuit had been robust. Insider quotes The Sun describing Walliams' allegations as absurd, embarrassing, and utterly bizarre. A high court writ contesting the claims as plain wrong. An unfollowing on Instagram that communicated more clearly than any legal statement could show that whatever had existed between these two men across 10 years of shared television was now something different. They had appeared to be genuine friends. The banter on the BGT panel was not performed. The warmth between them read as real. Walliams had described Cowell as one of his closest friends at various points during their time together on the show. The legal dispute and all that played out destroyed that claim immediately. The feud surfaced publicly again on April 2025. David Walliams appeared at Advertising Week Europe in central London alongside his comedy partner, Matt Lucas. A panel discussion, a microphone in front of him, and a question from the host that gave him exactly the opening he apparently wanted. The host noted that Walliams had won the Best TV Judge Award at the National Television Awards 4 times. His response was pointed, precise. Clearly not improvised. He described BGT as a tiny part of my career, a show he had been on for a decade, but that represented a small fraction of everything he had done professionally. The implicit comparison was obvious to everyone in the room and everyone who watched the clip circulate online afterward. 4 NTA wins for Best TV Judge, an accolade Simon Cowell had never won across 18 series and the better part of 2 decades as the face of the show he created. The dig was small in its delivery and enormous in its implication. I was better at your job than you were. For 4 years in a row, the audience agreed with me. Cowell did not respond publicly to the Advertising Week comments. He did not need to. The show that Williams described as a tiny part of his career was in production for its 19th series. Williams was at an advertising conference making pointed jokes. The contrast spoke for itself. But here is what the ongoing feud between these two men obscures about the full picture of what happened. The BGT scandal that David Williams was at the center of was not primarily about Simon Cowell. It was not primarily about recording policies or misuse of private information or £5 million settlements. It was about real people who came to audition for a television show and were described in degrading terms by someone who was supposed to be assessing their talent. While Cowell and Williams traded legal writs and public digs, that reality sat quietly underneath all of it. And the show they had invested their credibility in together kept moving forward. BGT. After the scandal, what Simon Cowell built on the other side.
Who you know in East Sussex?
Come on, Grandad.
I'm serious, who are they?
I've got quite a few, actually. Quite a few, actually. My brother...
Britain's Got Talent Series 19 began airing on ITV1 on February 21st, 2026. Simon Cowell is still there. Amanda Holden is still there. Alicia Dixon is still there. The Pioneers are still there. The show that David Williams described as a tiny part of his career is in its 19th series. The show that generated the biggest scandal in its history has not only survived that scandal, it has grown past it in ways that make the Williams era feel like one chapter in a much longer story. That is the answer to every question the scandal raised about whether BGT could continue. Not a statement, not a press release. 19 series and a new panel and auditions in Birmingham and Blackpool in October 2025 and a premiere date in February 2026. The show is the real deal. Bruno Tonioli arrived in Series 16 as the immediate response to the vacancy Williams had left. His background was as Strictly Come Dancing. His energy was different from Williams, warmer, less combative, more focused on the acts and less on generating judge-to-judge chemistry. He served a specific function in the transition period. He normalized the new panel composition without trying to replicate what had existed before. He stayed for 3 series. Then, on July 2025, he announced his departure. His commitments as a judge on Dancing with the Stars in the United States made the BGT schedule incompatible. He left without controversy, without legal disputes, without public feuds. He was thanked and replaced. The contrast with the Williams departure was complete. KSI joined the panel for Series 19. The decision was not subtle in its intention. KSI is one of the most recognizable figures in British digital entertainment. YouTube, boxing, music, a fan base that skews younger and more digitally engaged than the traditional BGT audience demographic. His arrival was a signal about where Simon Cowell sees the show's future, not away from its core identity, toward a version of that identity that reaches the generation of viewers who discovered Bars and Melody's golden buzzer moment not when it aired in 2014, but when they found it on YouTube sometime afterward. The BGT YouTube channel is one of the most watched in British television history, confirmed by All and Sundry. Bars and Melody's audition alone has accumulated 255 million views as of June 2025. The show's global digital footprint represents something considerably larger than its domestic ITV ratings suggest. It is a content ecosystem as much as a television program. No show has attained it in recent times. Cowell understands this. The KSI edition is consistent with someone who sees the show's next chapter as requiring both the continuity of its core panel and the addition of a voice that speaks to a genuinely different audience. And then there is Cowell living his best life. He is 65 years old and in 2026. He has been the face of BGT since its first series in 2007. He survived a serious bicycle accident in 2020 that required spinal surgery and left him hospitalized for an extended period. He has spoken publicly about the experience, about the pain, about the recovery, about how it changed his relationship with his own physical limitations. He is engaged to Lauren Silverman. His son Eric, born in 2014, is 12 years old. His public statements about fatherhood have consistently described it as the most significant personal development of his adult life. The man who built an empire on the controlled performance of ruthless professional judgment has become, by his own account, deeply changed by the experience of raising a child. The BGT auditions in Blackpool in 2025 produced the kind of moment that has always defined the show at its best. Cowell was heckled by the audience, called an old fart. He found it absolutely hilarious. A source close to him said he loves having BGT in Blackpool precisely because the crowds are so raucous and enthusiastic. He loves being on the receiving end of their passion. He even encourages them to misbehave. That detail matters. A 65-year-old television executive who built the most powerful talent franchise in British broadcasting history, being called an old fart by a Blackpool crowd and laughing about it. That is a man comfortable in all its ramifications. The scandal happened. The feud continues. The lawsuit was settled, but Walliams was no longer there. And Simon Cowell is still running affairs in the system he has built. This is quite hilarious. The show finally spoke about its biggest crisis not through press releases or carefully worded statements, but through the simple act of continuing to exist. That is the most powerful statement Cowell has made since pioneering the affairs of Britain's Got Talent. What the scandal revealed about BGT, about power, and about television.
And brings out a hose pipe and uses it as a trumpet. And I think that's brilliant.
They bring out a hose pipe and start playing it.
The Walliams scandal was not just about offensive comments made during a filming break. There was something underneath. It never was. That framing, the one that Walliams himself offered in his initial apology, reduced something with significant structural dimensions to a personal failing in a private moment. And that reduction served a purpose. It made the story smaller than it actually was. The real story was bigger, and it was about things that British television has always struggled to examine honestly about itself. At least they weren't being sincere in this matter. Power. Who holds it in a production environment? How it is exercised? And what happens to ordinary people who enter that environment without understanding the full terms of the transaction they are agreeing to? The people who audition for Britain's Got Talent are not celebrities. They are not media-trained professionals with publicists and legal teams managing their exposure. They are ordinary members of the public who believe they have a talent worth sharing with the world and who submit themselves to the judgment of the panel in good faith. That submission requires a specific kind of trust. You are not just performing. You are making yourself vulnerable in front of cameras that will broadcast your best or your worst moment to an audience of millions. The implicit agreement of that transaction is that the people on the other side of the desk are taking your participation seriously. The transcript revealed that at least one judge was not handling matters well. The elderly contestant, who was called an expletive after leaving the stage, had not done anything to deserve that description. He had simply auditioned for a television show. The female contestant, who was subjected to a sexually crude remark, had done the same. They had trusted the show. They had trusted the process. That trust was not honored. Instead, they received a backlash for being themselves. Here's the micro question this section is answering directly. In the entire public narrative that followed the Walliams scandal, from December 2022 to the £5 million settlement in November 2023, how many times were those contestants specifically named, formally acknowledged, or publicly compensated? The answer is not straightforward. Their specific identities were never publicly confirmed in the coverage. Walliams' apology spoke about the people he had made disrespectful comments about in general terms. No formal acknowledgement of those specific individuals appears in the public record of the scandal's resolution. The settlement addressed Walliams' grievance. Fremantle apologized to Williams. The production practices were reviewed for the benefit of the talent on the show going forward. The people at the center of what made the comments harmful in the first place were effectively peripheral to their own story. That is not an accident. It is the result of how power organizes legal and media narratives in situations like this. The person with the resources to pursue legal action receives the formal resolution. The people without those resources receive whatever acknowledgement the production chooses to offer. Then there is the recording policy question. The production announced in 2018 that judges' desk conversations would be recorded. This fact was deployed in response to Williams' lawsuit to establish that the recording was legitimate and not secret. It succeeded in that legal context. But the announcement of a recording policy does not automatically mean that every person in that environment fully understood or continuously remembered its implications. It does not mean that Williams consciously calibrated his conversations for the preceding 2 years with the knowledge that they could become part of a broadcast or a legal document. Cowell's position that the recording was publicly announced and therefore legitimate is defensible in a legal sense. It is less satisfying as a complete account of the institutional responsibility involved. And then there is the contestant's question from a different angle. If the production was recording judges' conversations for possible use in broadcast content, and those recordings captured comments about specific people who were auditionees on the show, what were the consent and privacy implications for those people? They did not consent to being discussed in those conversations. They did not consent to potentially becoming material for broadcast in that form. That question was never publicly addressed. Not by Fremantle, not by Cowell, not by the legal settlement, not by the apologies. Cowell finally spoke about the biggest scandal in BGT history, Potts. What he said was careful, morally positioned, and strategically distanced. What he did not say was where his responsibility began and ended in relation to a production environment he created and oversaw. The show kept going. The new series keeps airing. The talent keeps coming through the door. And the question of who finally is held at the middle of the scandal, the contestants, not the judges, remains unanswerable even in the table of those who had the power to do so. Simon Cowell finally spoke about Britain's Got Talent's biggest scandal. He called the comments upsetting. He called them completely unacceptable. He said he had been on holiday when it all unfolded. What he didn't say was everything this story has been circling from the beginning. The show is in its 19th series. Williams is gone. The settlement is signed. The production practices have been reviewed. But the people whose auditions brought this exposition are still waiting for someone to put their names in the sentence. If this story made you think differently about BGT, leave a comment below. And share it with someone who needs to hear it.